Comrades, as the pandemic broke out around the world, yeah, many people realized the impacts that neoliberalism has had uh, and in relation to inequalities, but also in relation to the decimation of the public sectors everywhere. Um, the way privatization, it's quite distracting. The way privatization, the way privatization, the structural adjustment programs, and the increased liberalization of the financial economy took place following the 1980s. We see the hollowing out of public services. We see a shift in public goods being delivered for people's needs towards the need to create profits. First, the commodification of this, commercialization, and increased corporatization. So, electricity, transport, water, many of these services became privatized. And in South Africa, it was partly done, not entirely. And so we have the editorial of the Financial Times on the 3rd of April saying, now is the time for radical reform. We need to reverse the prevailing policy direction of the last 4 decades. And we need to put on the table, or we need to accept governments, a more active role for governments in the economy. They must see public services as investments rather than liabilities, and look for ways to make labor markets less expensive. So this is like the Financial Times is based in the United Kingdom. They call themselves the Economic and Business Press Journal, and they even recognize that neoliberalism has failed. You know? And they're saying we need to roll back the neoliberal agenda. And at the time, our business press said something quite similar. The editorial, or one of the main editors from Business Day, said that now is not the time to fight with the public sector workers. This was in April last year. But of course, that was the time when the final year of the public sector, of the 3-year public sector wage agreement was reneged, and no workers received the increase that was agreed to in 2018. But this was actually on top of, and at the time also I should say there was an announcement that 160 billion rand is going to be cut from the public sector wage bill over the next 3 years. And that was announced in 2019 already, and it was reflected in the 2020 budget. And this is on top of reductions to compensation ceilings in 2017 and 2018 of 10 billion and 15 billion rand respectively. And coincidentally, the cuts to the public sector wage bill, the proposed cuts over and above the reneging of the final year of the wage agreement, was proposed or imposed, I should say, considering the way the court ruled it on, just a couple of weeks after the IMF came to visit South Africa and wrote a letter. And in the letter, one of the things that they said was, with public debt on the rise, directors encouraged authorities to focus on maintaining medium-term debt sustainability through a growth-friendly and expenditure-based fiscal consolidation. Noting that the upcoming budget discussion provides an opportunity for authorities to take the necessary reforms, directors suggested reductions in the public sector wage bill, public contingencies from the SMEs coupled with improved tax administration and fiscal compliance. So you can see the proposed unbundling and regionalization of ESCOM, the cuts to the public sector wage bill, and the increased it's out of the neoliberal agenda. And so very quickly, we see governments and business turning back from the very advice that proposed less than a year ago. Now, there's a number of problems with this austerity neoliberal regime, and in the first instance, and it will result in a self-defeating prophecy. And that is really because the idea of cutting government spending, which was proposed at the time to be cut by 260 billion rand over 3 years, of which 160 billion was from the public sector wage bill. So you can see the biggest cut actually came from the public sector wage bill. So what that means is that you're reducing government spending. So you're not thickening the economy at all. It will reduce in size, right? Now, this is all in the name of, as the IMF suggests, reducing government's debt ratio, first to reduce its size of the debt. So what does this mean? What does this ultimately mean? Is that when we look at debt, debt is measured as a ratio of debt to the size of the economy. Okay, so even if you are increasing the amount you're paying on debt, but you're decreasing spending on the other sides of the economy, you're reducing the size of the economy, and so the ratio of debt to the size of the economy will actually invariably grow over the long run. So this is a self-defeating strategy, and that's why many people were calling for stimulus. And so this is what you see. You have consolidation, fiscal consolidation, which is reducing the amount of spending, which is the languages you hear from the finance minister Mboweni in the budget speech, etc. And the comparison or the alternative would be a well-spent stimulus. Okay? And that's why we say austerity is the medicine. The medicine is actually going to kill the patient. And that's quite important because we have to consider this question in the context where we have a crisis in the health sector, right? Not only because of COVID, but which predates COVID. And in early 2020, even just before, around about the time of the pandemic outbreak, there was a release of information to say that just under 40,000 vacancies exist in the public sector, in the public health sector alone, right? And a study in the center by the National Department of Health and indicates that by 2025 we need to have an additional 97,000 workers in the public sector. This would cost an additional 40 billion rand. So if you're cutting the wage bill over the next 3 years, how are you going to fill those 40,000 vacancies or get the additional 97,000 health workers that's required? So that's actually more than 100,000 posts that needs to be filled, right? Now, then we got to look at in your packs is what government's response is. And you will see there's a circular, a memo in the Eastern Cape that puts a moratorium on employment. No more hiring of health workers in the Eastern Cape. And what do we know about the Eastern Cape hospitals? They are collapsing. So it's going to get worse, comrades. In education, we have a similar problem, even by government's own accounts. I'm not sure if you heard what Busi read, but it may be worthwhile to say it again. And that is no compensation growth of 0.8% per year. That's in nominal terms, comrades. That's not accounting for inflation. Over the medium-term economic framework, that's just over the next 3 years. Combined with early retirements, will reduce the number of teachers. This, coupled with the rising number of learners, implies larger class sizes, especially in elementary schools. This is expected to negatively affect learning outcomes. You teachers, you should know this. Government is saying this themselves, comrades, in the budget. So on basic education, in the budget, I think it's page 41, we can send it to you. Low compensation growth of 0.8% per year. And then I'm saying that's not including inflation, and that doesn't account for population growth. Over the medium-term economic framework, over the next 3 years, early retirements will reduce the low compensation employment growth, plus early retirements will reduce the number of teachers. When you put this with the rising number of learners, which will mean larger class sizes, especially in no-fee schools, the majority of schools in the country, this is expected to negatively impact learning outcomes. This is from David. So, then we have a guy who crunched the numbers for us. Dr. Dick Forster. And he took, what's important is not the spreadsheet, what's important is what I'm going to tell you now. All right? So, government is expecting the wage bill to be a certain amount for the next year. Okay? X amount. And from that, we know how many workers are in the public sector now, right? And there's an average increase, nominal increase in the wages of workers that relates to medical aid increases. So it's not zero across the board. Okay? So when you then look at that increase with the number of workers in the public sector, it gives you X amount, right? Or let's say Y amount. Now, when we look at the amount that government wants the budget to be, and if we look at the level of the budget to be, and if we look at the level of increases, that nominal increase by the population growth for the year 2022-23 and the year 2023-24, what we see is that the level of cuts is not made. There is not sufficient cuts. So we have to then look at the average, how much cuts is still needed to be made, and divided by the average wage in the public sector. Okay? And then that gives us a sense of how many people's jobs need to be lost to be able to make sure that the wage bill equals what government's proposed wage bill is. Shall I say it again? I don't know if